Hello again, everyone. This is Professor Casey. Today we're discussing chapters 3 and 4 from Lord of the Flies. Now that we've kind of established who the characters are, where they are, kind of what's going on, now we can start to progress a little bit more with the story. Okay, and as I said before, this story is primarily character driven, although the setting itself does play a very large role in that. And as we've established already before, the setting itself can even be viewed in some cases as a character. Okay, and so over the course of the next couple of chapters here, you'll start to see how it begins to affect our characters. So as far as our cast of characters go, okay, we've still got the same three characters that we have already established in the first couple of chapters. We have Ralph, who is considered our fair-haired boy, right? He's the leader of the group, and he seems to just kind of represent the everyday kid. Okay, he doesn't really have any distinguishing features or anything that makes him really outstanding compared to anyone else. So he kind of just represents just a character that the reader can actually identify with in some way. Okay? We still have Piggy, of course, and remember, Piggy is the one who is still kind of the outsider. Okay, he has been bullied for most of his life because, as the author states, he is quote very fat, and is also wears glasses. Okay, so he is he's a kid who's very bullied. He's also very smart, though. Okay, you'll find over the course of the story, when it comes to good ideas coming across, Piggy is typically the one who comes up with these ideas. He is the one who is able to hatch the ideas, and Ralph typically acts as a bit of a mouthpiece for him, though. Okay? Ralph is a little bit more appealing in terms of his appearance, in terms of his personality, and so Piggy and Ralph tend to kind of work in tandem with one another. We still have Jack, of course, and Jack is, remember, the leader of the boys' choir. He is the oldest one of the group, and he's very resentful of the fact that the other boys did not choose him to lead the group. Okay, remember, the boys had a democratic election in the first chapter to decide who was going to be their leader on the island, and they chose Ralph, okay, because Ralph is the one who ostensibly brought them all together, although Piggy was the one who suggested Ralph use the conch as a trumpet in the first place. Okay? And Jack at this point has been given the responsibility of being a hunter, although he's been very ineffective up until now. Okay? He has not been able to catch or kill a pig because he hesitates too much, and he seems to be very power hungry, but hasn't quite gotten the nerve yet to actually take the next step. Right? And in this chapter, we're actually introduced to a brand new character. Okay, there's only a few more characters who are introduced in the course of the story. Most of the boys, we never really learn their names or anything about them. But this new boy is named Simon. Okay, and the picture that you see here is actually taken from the 1990 film version. And I like this depiction of Simon more than any other, just because he seems like he seems to embody the character a little bit better. Okay. And Simon is kind of a strange figure because he is one who does not actually act very much like a child. Okay, Simon seems to be very wise beyond his years. We don't really know much about his age. He's probably around the same age as Ralph and Piggy, maybe about 10 or 11 years old. But Simon is a very good-natured individual. He is the consummate good guy in all this. Okay, he genuinely cares for other people around him. He tends to take care of the little children who are around, and he's just a very helpful and nice kid. Okay, so he starts to take on a much more prominent role in the story from this point going forward. Okay, so these are still our primary cast of characters and the ones that we're still concerned with. Now, chapter 3 is called Huts on the Beach. Okay, and of course, it deals with the actual need for the boys to build shelter. Okay, and it opens with Ralph being in a very frustrated position because, like Jack, he has been unable to fulfill his promises to the other boys. Okay, Ralph has promised that he and his contingency would build shelter for them in the form of something like you see here in the picture. Okay, some kind of a primitive little hut on a beach, just like the title suggests. Okay, probably just made from driftwood and whatever they can find. But Ralph, again, he's very frustrated by the fact that he is really one of the only kids who is actually doing any work. Okay, most of the other boys who are quite a bit younger than he is, and understandably don't want to do any kind of work, are actually playing in the sand, building sand castles. Some of them are just going for a swim in the ocean, but nobody is really working. Okay, Ralph is really almost the only one doing anything here. And meanwhile, Ralph is also frustrated with the fact that Jack has been unable to fulfill his promise. Okay, Jack is gone all day, every day in the jungle hunting for food, and he comes home empty-handed at the end of every single day. Okay, and so the boys are kind of forced to eat whatever they can find because Jack has been unable to give them meat of any sort. Okay, and most of the food that they have been able to eat is stuff that they've just foraged from the trees. Okay, primarily it's fruit that they've been able to find. And I don't recall if the book actually specifically states what kind of fruit it is. It doesn't really matter that much. But if you have ever eaten a very fruit-rich diet, okay, you'll know that if that's all you eat for a prolonged period of time, your stomach is not going to like you very much. Okay, and the boys in this particular situation are at a very big disadvantage. Okay, obviously they have no adults to help facilitate what kind of diet they need. And so when they start eating this really fruit-rich diet, they get really sick to their stomachs, okay? And of course, if you're alone on a desert island and that's all you eat, you get sick, there is no real bathroom around, okay? You have to just kind of make room, make use of whatever you can. There's obviously no toilet paper. There's no creature comfort of any kind, okay? So these boys are stuck and alone in a situation like this, and many of them are getting sick. Okay, so this is not a good situation to be in, and Ralph is one of the boys who's suffering from this, right? And he's mad because he's having to get sick. He's mad because he is doing all the work while he's getting sick. So this is a very tough spot for him to be in, and not one where most people would want to be a leader. Okay, knowing all the hardships and stuff, most of which many people won't even take into consideration. Okay, so this is one of those situations where being a leader is not always the best thing. And the ones who are suffering the most from all this are the ones that are referred to as the little ones in the story. Okay, little ones is just little ones, the little children, the smaller children. Okay, many of them are still reeling from the trauma of knowing that the other young boy from chapter 2 disappeared and has apparently been killed. Okay, remember, we never actually discover his body at any point during the story. So the general consensus among people who have criticized the story itself typically is that the boy died somewhere in the fire. Okay, that his body has burned up somehow. Something has happened to him relating to the fire. But most of the other little kids, even though they may be, traumatized by the fire itself, they most likely think that this young boy has been eaten by the monster that he claims to have seen on the island. Okay. And of course, they are suffering from nightmares. There's no adults around to really help them out. Simon is really the only one taking care of them. And of course, they're still suffering from a very poor diet as well. Okay, so for a little child to be sick to their stomach all the time, to be having nightmares, this is just compounding the trauma for these poor kids. Okay, and it's kind of heartbreaking because they're also being bullied by some of the older kids too, right? Even they may be building sandcastles and so forth, but they are also being pushed around by some of the other kids, primarily the ones who are members of Jack's group. And Ralph and Jack end up getting into a big argument at some point in this chapter because Jack comes back from the hunt with nothing in his hands. Ralph, of course, has been sick all day, and when he's not being sick, then he's working. He's the only one working, and frustrations and tensions just kind of boil over. Okay, it doesn't actually come to blows here. Okay, the boys never actually get into a fist fight. But they end up getting into an argument, and it becomes more and more evident that there is a rift building between the two. Okay, and eventually they calm themselves down enough and say, "Let's cool down. Let's go take a dip in the ocean. Right? We've been in the heat all day. We're sick. We're miserable. Let's try to cool off and relax a little bit." Okay. So this is one of the only times in the book that Ralph and Jack are actually able to kind of bury the hatchet, so to speak, and get, kind of make amends, at least for the time being. And again, Simon is really the only help that Ralph is getting in this story. Okay? Simon is, again, genuinely concerned for everyone else's well-being. Simon himself is suffering as well. Keep in mind, everybody has to eat the same thing. And Simon is doing everything he can. Right? He's not only helping Ralph, he's also taking care of the little kids. He's doing everything that he possibly can. Okay? And there's only so much that he can do. And the other thing about Simon, too, aside from his responsibilities and what he does for Ralph, is that his relationship to nature is very different. Whereas most of the other boys in the story are constantly fighting against the island itself, okay, in terms of it being a very quote unquote savage place, right? Some place where they can't actually get any food or shelter or anything very easily. Simon is the only one who seems to just kind of revel in the fact that he is out in nature. Okay, when he is done with his work for the day, he finds a little clearing in the jungle where he can actually sit and just almost meditate. Okay, he just likes to listen to the waterfalls. He likes to listen to the birds, feel the breeze and the trees and so forth, see the colors. He just kind of is taking it all in. Okay, so he's a very quiet kid and one who seems to kind of recharge by getting out in nature. Okay, and again, all the other kids are still acting like kids, right? They're, messing around, they're playing in the ocean, they're splashing each other, playing in the sand, whatever. And Simon is the only one who seems to just be kind of an introvert, right? He goes off and just likes to be by himself for a little while. Now, in terms of the analysis for chapter 3, again, Simon is the one who is, because he's a newcomer and because he kind of throws a wrench in the cogs, so to speak, for the whole dichotomy that we've already discussed about humans versus nature. Okay, remember, in this particular dichotomy, humans and nature tend to be opposed to one another. They're constantly fighting against one another for dominance. Okay, and again, most of the other boys are experiencing this very, sharply. Okay, but Simon is the only one who seems to be in relative harmony with nature. Okay? He doesn't quite fit the mold for this story. Okay? In addition to that, he also does not mimic adults in his actions like the other boys do. Okay, Ralph is trying to act like an adult by using the conch shell as a symbol of order, right? The boys actually end up passing this shell around to one another when they have a meeting, and whoever is holding the conch shell has the only right to speak, and everyone else has to remain quiet. Okay? Seems almost like something you might see in a kindergarten class. But when it comes to Simon, though, again, he's not really trying to mimic adults in the way that he does things. He doesn't do it because he thinks he's going to get in trouble. He actually does care. Okay, so this actually makes him a very mature character in the course of the story. He's really the most adult-like character that we see among boys. And again, as I said before, he's not at odds with nature like most of the other boys either. He seems to just kind of take things in stride. He has a fairly laid-back attitude, and he does his best to just kind of keep the peace, so to speak. And it begs the question here. Simon is a character that, to me anyway, comes across as what is known as an empath. Okay, and an empath comes from the word empathy. Okay, and having empathy for another individual is exactly what Simon does. Right, he understands what people are feeling, he understands that they're suffering, and he cares for them and genuinely wants them to feel better. Okay, but an empath is somebody who has almost a sixth sense. Okay, it's almost like having a psychic ability. Okay, where you can actually it's like an individual who can walk into a room and can understand what the people around them are feeling without ever having to say a word. Okay, they can sense tension nearby. They can sense positive or negative emotions. And there's plenty of scientific information to suggest that there are individuals who can do this, okay, who can actually sense what other people are thinking. They're just that well in tune. And it seems like Simon is kind of that way, okay, and it's a rarity for a child to have that kind of ability as well. So Simon seems to have this almost otherworldly personality about him. Okay, he's again very, very different from the other boys. And of course, the other big point of contention here that's a little bit of foreshadowing is the fact that Ralph and Jack are starting to pull apart more and more. Okay, and right now we can just chalk it up to the fact that they have only been on the island for apparently just a few days. We're not really ever given a specific amount of time here that they've been there, but it seems like they're really starting to struggle with this a little bit. Struggling with the fact that they're not able to get things done, that they don't have the creature comforts of home, right? They're still adjusting to the fact that there are no adults around to help them, and they have to kind of do everything themselves. And again, Jack is in a position right now, he's been given a responsibility that could lead him into a position of power and respect, okay? But only if he can take that extra step and do what's necessary, okay? It seems like he's mainly hesitating either out of fear or just out of reticence or whatever, right? He's not able to quite make the next step just yet. And again, Ralph is also in the same position because he has been elected the leader. He has been given a lot of responsibility now, and he's trying to prove himself too. He's trying to prove that he can provide shelter for these boys. And so he and Jack are in a very similar type of situation. Okay, they're just trying to provide different things in terms of having actual necessities. Okay. In psychology, this is something known as Maslow's hierarchy of need. Okay, this is where we talk about the level of severity when it comes to specific things that human beings need. Okay, and right now they're struggling to fulfill their most basic needs. Okay, having food and shelter. Okay, just something in order to survive. They are in survival mode right now. Now in chapter 4, things begin to change a little bit, okay? Because at the beginning of the chapter, we experience a time jump, okay? And it's not very clear how long of a time jump this actually is. Seems like the boys have already been there for a few days in the course of the first 3 chapters, but now it appears that we jump ahead a few weeks, perhaps even a few months, because of some of the descriptions that we're given here. The boy's hair, for example, has grown a little bit longer. Their clothing is getting more and more dirty, and it's beginning to fall apart. And as you see here in the pictures, right, this actually comes from the 1963 film, okay, and this shows the evolution of Piggy throughout the course of the film, okay. He begins on the far left. This is what he looks like when he and Ralph meet for the first time. He's very clean cut, still wearing his uniform. And over the course of the movie, right, he gets dirtier and dirtier. He looks more miserable. And it appears that he's actually beginning to perhaps even lose a little bit of weight as well, right? Because his diet is so poor. He's gotten sick a few times. And the other boys also experience these same types of symptoms. Okay, they're still clinging to this quote-unquote civilized form of living, and it's really beginning to take a toll on them when they can't do anything about it. Okay, they're still struggling to adapt here. And Ralph and Piggy in particular are the most uncomfortable. Right, they're used to having their hair cut on a regular basis. They're used to staying clean and all that, and so it's really difficult for them to deal with this. And most of the other boys in the story are also experiencing not just these types of uncomfortable things, but because they live on a beach now, right? And in the middle of the day, when it's over 100 degrees, when the humidity is extremely high, you can imagine that they're perhaps somewhere even in the South Pacific. It's hard to tell. But they begin to experience hallucinations when the heat rises. Okay, they start to see mirages on the horizon, right? And they think that there's the water is rippling. They think perhaps they see ships or so forth, and so it's difficult to tell what's real and what's not for them. Again, this is something where they're completely out of their element. And the little ones in particular are still spending most of their days building sandcastles. And at the same time, too, because they are so small, they're also being bullied by some of the older boys. One in particular who has just a very brief appearance here is named Roger. And Roger is one of Jack's group. Okay, he likes to torture the boys by throwing little rocks at them. Okay, he's not doing it to hurt them. He's just doing it to irritate them. Right? He kicks their sandcastles over, pushes them around, that kind of thing. Okay, so these poor little kids are already having nightmares. They're not sleeping well. They're sick from a fruit-rich diet, and now they're being bullied on top of that. Okay, so everybody is suffering in one form or another, except for Jack. Okay, Jack is the only one in the group who seems to be thriving in this type of situation. Okay, he has almost completely thrown off all elements of his old life. Okay, Jack has fully embraced the idea of what is sometimes referred to erroneously and not exactly politically correctly as going native. Okay, Jack has stripped down to a loincloth and a pair of shoes. He's begun to paint his face. He's painting his body. His hair has grown long. And so Jack is starting to take on this appearance almost of a barbarian over the course of the story, beginning at this point. Okay, so he's starting to try to build up the courage still to catch and kill a pig, which he still has not yet succeeded in doing. Now, one thing that is very important that we forgot to mention back in Chapter 2 is that after the signal fire ends up burning out of control for the first time, Jack promises Ralph that he is going to allocate 2 hunters from his group to watch the signal fire at all times. Okay? So, in other words, he's going to have a rotating shift of boys who are supposed to keep the fire burning all the time so that they can get rescued quicker. Okay? And in the midst of this time jump, okay, apparently the boys have been in kind of this rut for a long time. Okay, nothing has changed. Every day kind of bleeds into the next, right? Everything is extremely dull, and it appears that no one is really looking for them. Okay, so in the midst of all this, Jack and his group decide that they are all going to get together and they're going to hunt a pig together. And what he means by this is he is actually going to take the 2 boys who he has promised when it comes to the signal fire, he is going to take them off their post and he's going to take them hunting with him. And of course, for as long as they've been doing this, nothing has happened. It appears like he can maybe get away with it and no one will notice. But in the midst of all this, when these boys constantly believe they're seeing apparitions, they're seeing mirages on the horizon and everything, they believe their eyes are constantly playing tricks on them and they don't really think about it too much when they actually see a ship appear on the horizon. Okay? And at first, of course, the boys are down on the beach. Jack and his group are off hunting. No one knows that the boys are gone from the post. Okay? And when Ralph and Piggy see the ship, they think, oh, it's just another hallucination, right? This is just something else caused by the heat, something to torture us a little bit. And then it gets closer and closer. And Ralph finally realizes that this is, in fact, a ship. So he immediately gathers the boys, and they sprint up the side of the mountain to try to relight the signal fire. Okay, they realize the fire has gone out. Okay, and it takes them a long time to get there because the geography of this place is apparently pretty vast. Okay, this is a large area, and it's a full mountain that these boys have to get up in order to do this. And by the time they get up there and they try to relight the fire, they try to use Piggy's glasses, which takes a few minutes, the ship has already turned and veered off into the horizon again. It's gone. Now, this is a moment that is extremely, causes Ralph to feel pretty crestfallen. Okay, he realizes that he has failed to get them rescued, and not only is he angry with himself, he is furious with Jack for this. Because remember, Jack has promised him that he would keep somebody there at all times. And if these boys had been there, and if they had lit a fire big enough in the moment, they may very well have gotten rescued then and there, okay, and the story would have ended. Jack and his group, though, a few minutes later, actually do return, and this time they have succeeded in killing a pig. Okay, so this is a very strange, bittersweet trade-off here. Okay, again, Ralph and Piggy are absolutely just furious as they can be with Jack, and Jack is transformed, actually, when he returns from the hunt. He and his hunters, they're carrying this pig on a pole between them, right? They've got the pig tied to a pole and they're carrying it. They're drenched head to toe in blood, and they're chanting a very strange song, okay? Chanting something about this being their new home, how they're never going to go back, how they're never going to leave. And it seems almost as if they're possessed in a certain strange way, right? That something has come over them that has changed not only their appearance, but their personalities here. And Jack, in particular, is kind of caught up in what you might call some kind of a bloodlust euphoria. Okay, and what I mean by that is the thrill of him being able to actually kill something, being drenched in its blood, and just the effect of success, right? Something where he's actually gained a lot of power by doing that. It's kind of left him in kind of this weird trance-like state. He is he's experiencing so much happiness and such a rush of adrenaline and thrill out of this that he really doesn't care about the fact that he's in deep trouble here. Okay, the other boys are just screaming at him, yelling at him. Piggy gets right up in his face, screaming, telling him what an irresponsible jerk he is. And Jack snaps out of it and slaps Piggy as hard as he can. And when he does this, Piggy's glasses fall to the ground and one of the lenses breaks. And this is an important moment in the story because it's very symbolic, and we'll talk about that here in a second. This is the first time, though, that Jack has laid a hand on any of the other boys. Okay, this is his first violent act toward any of the others. Okay, and again, it's no coincidence that after he has killed a pig, Piggy is the one that he slaps. Okay. Again, there's some strange correlation going on here with pigs in the story. Okay? Pigs being something that violence is enacted upon for some reason. And Jack refuses to accept any kind of responsibility for his failure. Okay? He absolutely, just doesn't even acknowledge the fact that he took hunters away. He says, "I brought food back. I have nothing to apologize for. I've fulfilled my promise here. You still haven't built huts on the beach yet, Ralph." Right? So Ralph is very stung by this. Okay, he's stung by the fact that he still hasn't fulfilled his promise, and at the same time, too, Jack has fulfilled a promise. Okay. And the other thing that happens here too is the boys immediately put the pig over the fire and begin to roast it. Okay, they have a campfire going on down on the beach where the ship wouldn't be able to see it. And so as soon as they start doing that, Jack orders the boys reenact the hunt. Okay? And this becomes a recurring thing that occurs throughout the story here, is that anytime Jack wants to relish in his power, relish in his abilities, he has the boys chant and dance around the fire with spears and begin to reenact the hunt in a very tribalistic way. Okay? And it ends up alienating most of the other boys because, remember, they're still clinging to civilization here. And Jack and his group seem to be the only ones who are kind of trying to move in a different direction here, a much darker direction, too. Now, as far as the analysis goes for this chapter, again, there's a lot to unpack here. Okay, and compared to other chapters, this is one of the most important ones. The symbolism in this chapter is extremely important too, okay, more so than anything else. Piggy's glasses, of course, now are broken, and one of the lenses. And if you think about Piggy's glasses being kind of an instrument that makes things work, okay, in the most basic level, that's what glasses do, right? They make us see better, okay? We can actually function. Each one of the lenses in Piggy's glasses could potentially represent Ralph and Jack. Okay, they're the two who are, ostensibly the leaders of the group. And for one of the lenses to crack and break in the midst of all this shows that the leadership has now begun to crack as well. In particular, Jack himself has begun to break. Okay, so this is a very, very highly symbolic thing here. Okay, not only is Piggy not able to see, right, but now it seems like one of the leaders of the group is beginning to crack under the pressure here. And also bear in mind, Piggy's glasses are the only way that they are able to make fire. Okay? So for one of the lenses to break, this is a big setback, because if the other one breaks, they don't have any way of making fire. Okay? The lenses are not going to refract sunlight effectively enough. They're not going to be able to catch anything on fire, not to mention the fact that Piggy will be effectively blind. Okay? So this is a big setback and something that is a huge risk for Jack to have done. The signal fire, too, is now burned out as well. Okay, and in this particular chapter, at least for the time being anyway, it's burned out. They do eventually rekindle it again. But the signal fire itself represents hope. Okay? It represents the hope that they'll be rescued, hope that it still ties them to civilization to a certain extent. And I mean, if you think about the history of humankind, a lot of people point to the discovery of fire as being one of the very biggest moments, if not the biggest moment, for civilization, right? Helps us to live longer, keeps us warm, helps us cook food, provide light, and scare away predators, all kinds of stuff, okay? And so for this to be extinguished, this is almost like the boys are beginning to lose hope. And in particular, Jack is beginning to lose hope. The chant that he and the other boys recite about, how they'll never go home again, this is their new home, seems to indicate that they have kind of given up on civilized life. And so now they are actually pulling themselves completely on the mercy of the island, wanting to live here for good. And of course, Jack's appearance. Okay, this is an image from the 1990 film, which actually gives a really good visual image of what Jack now looks like. Okay, he's begun to paint his face with charcoal. He smeared his face with some blood. He's very dirty. His hair is getting longer. He's wearing tribal jewelry of some kind. And so this is starting to, again, take on a form of where the savagery is beginning to seep in. Okay, Jack has kind of done away completely with civilization here. He has gone fully wild. Okay, and it seems like this is not really a stable mindset for him to be in. Okay, he has proven that he has a violent nature. He has killed now. He's killed a pig, and he's also lashed out in violence at one of his fellows here. Okay, so this is not a good situation for any of the boys to be in, and Jack in particular seems already to be a bit unstable. Okay, the fact that he was already resentful a little bit of everything from the beginning, and now that he has begun to prove that he's able to kill, right, this is actually taking things a little bit further in a direction that most other characters probably don't want to go. And the hunt itself is probably the most dramatic shift in the story. Okay, it's one of the many climaxes that occur in this story. Okay? A climax is a moment where there is no going back. Okay, and this story arguably has at least 2 climaxes, maybe even 3. Several stories have more than one climax, but there is typically several steps in a story. There's the exposition, which we've had in the first couple of chapters. Okay, exposition is when we have introduction to the characters and the setting, just kind of establishing what's going on. Okay, we're in the middle of rising action right now in the story. Okay, rising action is when you have plot elements that are starting to move forward and they're moving toward a climax. Okay, and we are in the midst of one of the climaxes right now. Okay, a climax, again, it's a major shift in the story where one or more characters experiences something dramatic that changes them. And in this case, this is the moment where Jack changes. He begins to change here. Okay, and Jack does not go back to the leader of a boys' choir after this. Okay, he is now the leader of a group of hunters. Okay. And they effectively kill on a regular basis. Okay? He's a very powerful figure now. And the symbolism of the pig's blood here is another thing. Okay, we've already talked about how pigs have this taboo associated with them from other cultures and so forth. And for Jack to be drenched in pig's blood seems like seems offensive to some people, I'm sure. It's a situation where this is almost obscene, right? It's blasphemous, even if you like. Okay, a blasphemous baptism, if you like, where essentially something profane is now washed over him and it's beginning to seep into him. Okay, something about the pigs being unclean is beginning to seep into his character now. Okay, and the fact that he's taken the life of one seems like it's a stain on him, so to speak. Okay, but it's begun to change him here. And so now Jack has become a very powerful leader. He is kind of going off the rails a little bit here when it comes to emotions as well. And we talked about the dichotomy between rationality and emotionality, about how British men in the 20th century were looked at as individuals who clung very heavily to rationality, right, working without emotions. And for Jack to give in to emotions like this could potentially make him weak, but in this case, he turns it into something violent and fearsome, right? So he's starting to govern a little bit more by fear now. And of course, that is coupled with violence, which makes things even worse, okay? Because now Jack is becoming more unpredictable, okay? Nobody would have expected him to lash out and slap Piggy the way that he did, okay? So these characters are now beginning to undergo some changes, okay? We're starting to see who in the story is beginning to become a more dynamic character, who may potentially be static characters, and from here on, we'll start to see a little bit more rising action leading to another climax, okay? So that's all I've got for this particular presentation, and I will see you all later. Okay.